one-on-one. In an interview with EWTN News Nightly, President Donald Trump weighs in on the fight against the coronavirus and his thoughts on schools reopening. Leaving the country, why the former King of Spain has decided to live elsewhere. Ending early, new developments in the 2020 census are sparking concerns. And rebuilding effort, an update on a Greek Orthodox church destroyed in the terror attacks of September 11th, 2001. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, August 4th, 2020. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sabol. Today, EWTN News had the opportunity to speak to President Donald Trump in the Roosevelt Room of the White House. I asked him about the vandalism to Catholic churches and the reopening of schools, but we start with the economy. Thank you so much, Mr. President, for speaking with us today. We appreciate it. We have a lot to get to, but I first want to talk about the economy, where we are right now. Of course, we're starting with another round of stimulus. Can you talk about that and what's needed for Republicans and Democrats to meet in the middle?
So we had the greatest economy in the history of the world, not only in our country, in every country. We were beating China, beating everybody. They were having the worst economy they've had in over 67 years. So we were doing with the tariffs and all the things that I was doing. And then we had to close it up. It came from China. They should have stopped it. They could have stopped it, but they didn't. They stopped it from going into their country, but they didn't stop it from here, Europe, or the rest of the world. And we had to close it up, and we did that. And now we're coming back, and we're doing stimulus. We've already done it, as you know, and very successfully. And we'll probably have something worked out. We'll see what happens. The problem with the Democrats, as you know, they want bailout money for their states and cities that have done so poorly under Democrat leadership, and I'm not happy with that. It's not appropriate. This is having to do with the corona, I call it the China virus. And so I think we're doing very well. We had the best job numbers we've ever had, percentage-wise. You take a look at what happened. Guess close to 7 million jobs over the last 2 months. New numbers are going to be coming out very soon. We're back. We're doing very well. I think next year is going to be one of the best years we've ever had, and it looks very, very strong.
Looking forward to the third quarter, how do you anticipate that looking?
I think the third quarter is going to be good. I think it's going to be good. I think the fourth quarter is going to be very, very good. But we're just coming out of something that we had no choice. We saved millions of lives by closing. If we didn't close it up, you would have lost millions of lives. And by closing it, I mean, we've done a really good job. The ban on China was very important. We banned people coming in highly infected, and we banned people from coming in from China and then from Europe. We did the ban on Europe. Very important. It really, I think, is going to be, I think we're going to have a very special economy in about for next year. But I think third quarter actually is going to be very good.
A lot of things shut down, including churches. Let's talk about that and the importance of reopening churches. I know you've talked about that.
I think they should open the churches. It's up to the governors, but I think, and I'm recommending it, you open the churches. They'll spread. They'll be socially spread. They'll have masks. And they'll do what they have to do, you know, the hygiene and everything else that we know. It's a very simple list. But I think it's very unfair that they have, I saw Jim Jordan the other day talking about it very well, that they have 50,000 people protesting, and they're standing on top of each other practically, and yet you're not allowed to go to church, you don't go to schools. We want to open our churches, we want to open our schools, and everybody wants to be safe. They know what to do. They'll stay away, and, you know, won't be the same way. Maybe you'll have an extra service or 2 or 3, but they have to let the churches open. They want to put, I'm tell you, the Democrats want to put them out of business. They want to put the churches out of business, and it's very unfair. So they don't complain about the protests, which are horrible in many cases. You look at Portland, it's a disaster, but they don't want the churches open. They don't want the schools open. They don't want offices open. So it's a very unfair situation to a lot of people.
Mr. President, is there a way to deem churches as essential businesses? How can we do that?
I am looking at that because I think it's enough already. You have some states, I think they have they never want them open. They don't want churches open. Look, the Democrats, frankly, if you look at the radical left Democrats, which are radical left now, they've gone radical left, whether you're talking about life or whether you're talking about almost anything, they're not liking it. They're not liking it.
I know that you've heard about the vandalism, the horrific vandalism. Many, many churches have been vandalized over the past recent weeks. When you heard about that, what did you think?
I think it's a disgrace, and I think it's partially because they're not allowed to function. They're not allowed to really function. And I think it's disgraceful that it can happen. And, you know, they want to defund the police. They want to stop the police. They want to have them at least to a minimum. And we're just the opposite. I just got endorsed by Texas law enforcement, by Florida, all of the sheriffs and the law enforcement. I can't imagine I can't imagine law enforcement ever endorsing Biden. He's got a hard time in a lot of ways, let's face it. But I can't imagine that ever happening. So we're just about have everybody endorsing us in terms of law enforcement. And, you know, with the churches, you need some law enforcement to help you out also. But it's the fact that they're closed, and bad things happen when they're closed. It's a very terrible situation what they're doing to churches. And these are governors that are radical left or Democrat. It's almost becoming the same thing. And I don't think they want churches open.
What can be done to stop this vandalism? What do you think?
Well, what you need the law enforcement. It's areas usually run by radical left Democrats. I mean, where you have Republican leadership, where you have Republican governors and mayors, you don't have this problem. You have this problem where you have radical left Democrats in virtually every instance. So what you have to do is elect Republicans. And if you had a Republican, as an example, if Biden got in, you'd have Portland all over our country. It would be like Portland. These people are agitators, they're anarchists. You'd have that all over our country. You know, we stepped in, and a lot of people said we were early. Well, let us be early, better early than late. But we did a good job there. We did a great job in Seattle. That would have been burned to the ground, frankly. And but with Portland, and we didn't do our big job. We did our much smaller job. We had to protect our building. And our buildings, actually, a number of buildings, but the courthouse would have been burned down. The courthouse would have been destroyed if we didn't step in. People said, oh, we went early. Well, if we didn't go then, the courthouse would have been destroyed because Seattle was not protecting it. So you would have that situation all over the United States, and that's unacceptable.
And Mr. President, when top of mind for a lot of parents, including myself, the reopening of schools. I know you just tweeted about that.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
No, I want the schools open. First of all, children are unbelievably strong, right? Their immune system. Something's going on because out of thousands of deaths in New Jersey, thousands, because I just saw the statistics, many thousands of people died. One person under the age of 18, and that was a person I believe had diabetes on top of everything. So children just are, I guess I heard one doctor say virtually they're immune from it. They have a very strong something, and they are not affected, and we have to open our schools. You know, there's a big danger to keeping people locked in, and they're also finding it's wonderful to use computers, but it's not a great way of learning. They now know that it's much better to be with a teacher on campus or in a school. That's much better than looking at a computer all day long. So we have to get our schools open. We have to get them open soon.
And if there was one message you wanted to say to our viewers, what would it be right now?
Well, I think anybody having to do with, frankly, religion, but certainly the Catholic Church, you have to be with President Trump. When it comes to pro-life, when it comes to all of the things, these people are going to take all of your rights away, including Second Amendment, because, you know, Catholics like their Second Amendment. So I saved the Second Amendment. If I wasn't here, you wouldn't have a Second Amendment. And pro-life is your big thing, and you won't be on that side of the issue, I guarantee, if the radical left, because they're going to take over. They're going to push him around like he was nothing.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.
And the president also told me that he speaks regularly to Catholic leaders, including New York's Cardinal Timothy Dolan. EWTN News Nightly has reached out to the Joe Biden campaign for an interview. Stay tuned. President Donald Trump also signed a bill into law today that he says conserves the grandeur and splendor of God's creation. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, here at the White House in the middle of a pandemic, they had something to celebrate today in the East Room, the great outdoors.
This is truly God's creation.
President Donald Trump on signing into law the Great American Outdoors Act. The nation's natural wonders and public lands need a lot of work.
Today, more than 5,500 miles of roads, 17,000 miles of trails, and 24,000 buildings are in critical need of repair. They have been for a long time.
Now, big dollars on the way, including
$900 million a year in guaranteed funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund so that all Americans can continue to enjoy our parks, wildlife.
Meanwhile, on the pandemic front, still no deal as Congress negotiates another aid bill.
I always felt a person that lost their job, that basically their business was shut down because of the health care crisis that we had, no fault of their own, should be kept whole. That means get your full paycheck.
One unemployed airport janitor worries a lot these days now that the government's unemployment supplement has disappeared.
With the $600, the federal fund, it really helped me. I could pay off my bills.
Meanwhile, White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany went before reporters and when asked if the White House would consider another lockdown.
No, and I would refer you to what Dr. Fauci said back in May. He said we can't stay locked down for such a considerable period of time that you might do irreparable damage and have unintended consequences, including consequences for health.
Back to that Great American Outdoors Act, we're told it will create 100,000 jobs nationwide. Tracy?
Thank you, Owen. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting for us tonight. The Trump administration is announcing $35 million to combat the scourge of human trafficking. Presidential advisor Ivanka Trump and Attorney General Bill Barr met with survivors of human trafficking at the White House this afternoon. The $35 million in Justice Department grants will help to provide safe housing for victims of human trafficking. The huge storm moving up the East Coast hit North Carolina overnight as a Category 1 hurricane, but was downgraded to a tropical storm earlier today. It caused at least one tornado, and heavy rains are causing localized flooding. Hundreds of thousands of people lost power in the Carolinas. The storm is expected to hit New York City tonight. Forecasters expect Isaias to continue to weaken as it makes its way north to New England. A massive explosion shook the capital of Lebanon earlier today, and it was so big that it shattered windows miles away. The port of Beirut was flattened and was still burning hours after the blast. The cause is still unknown, but at least 10 people are reported killed. There are also reports of hospitals flooded with hundreds of injured, mostly by flying glass. It came at a time when Lebanon is passing through its worst economic and financial crisis in decades. The Prime Minister of Israel is defending an attack on Hezbollah terrorists. Benjamin Netanyahu also warns the terrorists not to try any more infiltration attempts. He is also promising to take more action. The Israeli army said last night that it targeted 4 militants in Syria who were planting bombs in the Golan Heights. In Iran, the stock market hits a record high despite huge economic problems. The Tehran Stock Exchange passed 2 million points earlier this week, even as the country is dealing with U.S. sanctions, rising unemployment, and runaway inflation. Pope Francis appoints a Spanish layman to the second highest position in the Vatican's economy office. Maximino Caballero is from Merida, Spain. He has a long career in finance economics and has worked for businesses in both Spain and the United States in positions of international finance. He will start as the Vatican's Secretary General later this month. The former King of Spain says that he will no longer live in that country. King Juan Carlos I is facing a financial scandal. The 82-year-old published a letter saying the decision comes following revelations of, quote, certain episodes from his past. He is credited with helping Spain peacefully restore democracy after the dictatorship of Francisco Franco, who died back in 1975. Joining us now from Madrid, Spain, is José Carlos González Hurtado, president of EWTN Spain. José Carlos, welcome to the show. So great to have you.
Good night, Tracy. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
So can you give us some background into the allegations the former king is now facing?
Well, Tracy, it's a complicated story. In reality, it all started in the context of an accusation for Miss Corina Larsen, who used to be a former friend of our King Juan Carlos. She was accused in Switzerland for money laundering, and then she herself accused our King Juan Carlos of receiving some bribes. Now, the truth is that there's no factual proof of those accusations, the accusation against King Juan Carlos. And actually, the King Juan Carlos has not received or has not been accused by the Spanish authorities or by the judicial in Switzerland. However, there has been a lot of media noise, and in the end, the royal house has decided that the best thing, or King Juan Carlos has decided that the best thing for him and for his son is actually to leave the country.
What has been the reaction in Spain, and has the Catholic Church made any statements?
Well, Tracy, in Spain, like in many other countries in the world, I mean, the politics are really polarized these days. Today, the Catholic Church has made a statement showing some respect and gratitude for King Juan Carlos for what he has done over more than 40 years that he was the King of Spain. Remember that he has played an important role bringing democracy to our country. And with regards to politics, I mean, you have the parties that I would call democratic parties, and they have all shown respect and gratitude and support for the decision of King Juan Carlos. And then you have the not so democratic parties like the Communist Party or the nationalist regional parties that have used this event to hit the monarchy itself as an institution and also the unity of the country.
I'm curious, has the monarchy influenced Catholicism in Spain in any way?
Spain has been Catholic from the 6th century, in which our king became Catholic. And then ever since, the monarchy, the kingdom, and Catholicism has been together. I mean, if you think of that, in reality, we think that most of the Catholics in the world are thanks to the Spanish Catholic kings, that they fought against Protestants during the religious wars, and they also spread Catholicism from Philippines to the United States. Now, the grandfather of King Juan Carlos, actually a little bit more than 100 years ago, in 1919, he dedicated Spain itself, the whole Spain, and he consecrated it to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Now, he was threatened at that time that he was doing that, he would be expelled of the country. He was threatened by, let's say, the leftists and the Mason at that time. And, well, the history says that in 1931, the king left Spain to exile. And so, yes, answering your question, Catholicism, kingdom, and Spain are all together, inextricably interwoven, I would say.
Well, José Carlos, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. José Carlos González Hurtado, president of EWTN Spain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Good night.
Coming up, a closer look at the 2020 census and why it's ending 1 month earlier than expected. Census Bureau will stop its count of the population sooner than expected. The Bureau says it will finish collecting 2020 census data on September 30th. It comes 1 month before the planned date. There are concerns the change could prevent an accurate count. Correspondent Mark Irons reports. Mark?
Tracy, the Census Bureau says it is moving up its deadline so it can process all of the data before the end of the year. And the Census Bureau director says it can be sped up without sacrificing completeness. But now there are concerns about how this could affect hard-to-count communities like immigrants and minorities.
The U.S. Census Bureau announces we will end field data collection by September 30th, 2020. The census is conducted every 10 years. Carrying out the 2020 census has been anything but normal.
I have my own specially designed mask.
Census Bureau Director Stephen Dillingham spoke at a congressional hearing last week.
Meeting challenges posed by the unprecedented brutal pandemic remains a top priority. The Census Bureau's dedicated workforce has worked hard and professionally to keep the 2020 census on track.
But with the deadline now sped up, will everyone be counted?
I'm very, very concerned.
Today, in a letter to Director Dillingham, U.S. Representative Carolyn Maloney, the chairwoman of the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, wrote, "This move will rush the enumeration process, result in inadequate follow-up, and undercount immigrant communities and communities of color who are historically undercounted." The census helps determine how $1.5 trillion in federal spending is distributed and how many congressional districts each state gets.
As of Sunday, 37% of U.S. households had not responded to the census questionnaire. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is urging that all people, including undocumented immigrants, be included and fully counted in the census. Tracy?
Okay, thank you, Mark. Correspondent Mark Irons reporting for us tonight. Tributes are pouring in for the former leader of Northern Ireland, John Hume. He is remembered as a great peacemaker for his role in ending decades of political violence.
His contribution to peace in Northern Ireland was extraordinary. I don't think we would ever have really got the peace process going and implemented if he hadn't been there offering help and advice. But he was a bigger figure, not just on the island of Ireland, but in Europe, in the United States.
John Hume was known as a visionary politician. He was able to convince British and Irish leaders to negotiate peace and received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1998. Hume was the Catholic leader of the Social Democratic and Labour Party and studied for the priesthood at St. Patrick's College. Up next, New York's governor signs a measure regarding filing claims of child sexual abuse. Plus, new developments in the Greek Orthodox Church destroyed in the September 11th terror attacks. As debate over the next COVID relief package continues, 3 bishop chairmen of the USCCB are urging Congressional Black Caucus leaders to support federal emergency relief for Catholic school students in urban areas. Bishops Michael C. Barber, Shelton J. Fabre, and Joseph N. Perry write, as the impact of the coronavirus has disproportionately affected the Black community, the same is true for our Catholic schools that serve predominantly Black communities. And we are imploring your help for these families who have sought a Catholic education for their children. Joining me now on Skype to talk more about this is Jennifer Daniels, Associate Director for Public Policy in the USCCB's Secretariat of Catholic Education. Jennifer, welcome. Good to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.
Well, the bishops say in their letter that Catholic schools are facing a crisis. What are you most concerned about as you witness more and more Catholic school closures, especially in some of the more urban areas?
Absolutely. We are saddened to hear that over 140 Catholic schools have already announced public closure across the country. And as our letter to the Congressional Black Caucus highlighted, many of those are in urban areas. New York City alone closed 20 Catholic schools. And you see other closures in Boston, Newark, Philly, Chicago, pretty much across the country. And we are looking for aid from our congressional leaders for our families so that they can stay in the school of their choice.
Well, you mentioned aid. Anything else that you would like Congress to do? And what would you like to see included in this next aid package?
Well, we have asked for 10% of the federal education money that's going to K-12 schools to be set aside for non-public schools, as we represent 10% of the population. And we would like to see that money being given to families in the form of scholarships so that they can take that money and use it for the school of their choice.
I'd like to go over some numbers. More than 130 Catholic schools have announced permanent closure, and more than 500 schools are uncertain about what this fall will bring. What are you hearing, Jennifer, from families who want to be able to send their children to Catholic schools in their communities?
Well, yeah, the families are struggling across the country due to the economic turndown, and they are wanting to keep their families, their children in our schools, but they face a lot of uncertainty. So this funding would give families certainty that they need to be able to make what is a pretty long-term decision, a 10, 12-month decision right now, while their own economic future is uncertain. So that is providing that certainty to the families is what these scholarships would do.
Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for your time. Jennifer Daniels, Associate Director for Public Policy in the USCCB's Secretariat of Catholic Education. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The governor of New York has extended the opportunity for people sexually abused as children to file lawsuits. Democrat Andrew Cuomo says the window for claims will remain open until August 2021. The legislation allows suits to be filed long after the statute of limitations has expired. The Catholic Diocese of Buffalo and Rochester have filed for bankruptcy after being named in hundreds of lawsuits under the new measure. And finally tonight, following a 3-year delay for financial problems, work has resumed on a Greek Orthodox church in New York City that was destroyed in the terror attacks on September 11th, 2001.
And numberless more wounded in body, wounded in heart and soul by a savage act of hatred and terror. We cannot, we must not, and we shall not let this stand.
The leader of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America blessed the rebuilding of St. Nicholas with holy water. When completed, it will serve Orthodox Christians and those from every faith who wish to remember the lives lost on September 11th. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sabol. Good night and God bless.